players are not going to really care about the overall lore of a setting, of a world. Why is that? Well, they have no connection to it. They're there for their character. That's what they're interested in. So how does it all tie into their character? Because if it doesn't tie into their character or what's going on around the character, players are not really going to be interested. So how do you get players to care about the lore, of the setting? Well, first, you might want to do like maybe a page or a half a page pitch on the world, on the setting, on the background. Vague information that will be important to a campaign you're going to run and how that might tie into the characters. So that information becomes interesting to them because it has to do with their character. It's focused on them, their campaign. So right away, you're going to get interest in that information. In reality, you don't really need to feed all the lore of a setting to the player characters, up front. And in many ways, you don't want to. In a way, I want players to not care about a good portion of the lore of the setting. What will happen is, as they travel through the world, I will introduce them to the lore in that way. They'll experience, the history, the backstory of the world as they meet people, as they encounter things in the game. And that is how you really get your players invested into something. Because in a way, they have to give a part of themselves to that thing. And once they have, they're invested in the world, in the setting. And the more they invest in it through their character, the more they want to know about it. And if you don't overwhelm them up front and you start feeding lore information, the stuff that might not up front matter right away, and you're feeding that throughout the game, throughout the gaming sessions, you're going to get a different response from players than if you try to overload them with, overwhelming amounts of lore, backstory to the setting. You want to consider how the lore might really relate to the characters. After the players get their characters made, you might want to look at their characters and how they would fit into the world. And say, here's some vital information about the lore, about the setting, that would relate to your character directly and not just the campaign. You're trying to find a way to get players interested in something that will be beneficial to them later. All the lore overall probably will not, affect them overall. Like there's portions of it that will be no good to them if they're not going to other parts of that setting, that world, to experience these other things. Everything's going to be local, down to the town where they're at and where they're going, or where they move to, the new base, the new town. It's always going to be local. So you don't need to give all the information. You only really need to give what is needed, like a need-to-know basis. That's how you should treat lore. I don't care if you're doing D&D or Vampire, like World of Darkness. I don't care what game you're going after. If you have a setting, have a world, understand that if you try to give, that 80% that is upfront no good to the players, they're not going to be interested. They're probably not going to read it all. And then any vital information will be lost. And you don't want that vital information just scattered through, crap loads of lore. You want to separate that. So again, your job should be, how do you pitch it? How do you do a good business pitch on the setting? How do you put your 5 minutes together, or 9 minutes, 9-minute pitch together for the setting, right? So you can cut pages away from the lore because you're only going to worry about what you need for the campaign. It's vital information, and that's all you're going to focus on. If you really take that approach, where you're going, what do they need to know for the campaign, and then what relates to their character, and the rest I will play in, throughout the campaign. Maybe they just hear, about the setting, about the lore, about the backstory, and it has no connection. And you can feed lore information that way. If it's interesting, it will be just interesting to hear, even if they're not going to experience it. As long as they're hearing it in-game, in character, then that's a great way, again, to feed that information. And some information could become vital later As they're exploring the world, where they were when they started. They weren't going to run into that thing. It wasn't important then. But feeding that information to them as they arrive at the new town where they will encounter some of this stuff. Well, hey, time it in. Plan it in that way to feed lore that way. But it's really on you, Dungeon Master or Game Master or Storyteller, to really put that together yourself. The books aren't really going to explain, or the setting book isn't really going to explain how you go about, doing a business pitch with the setting. It's just giving you a tool with a bunch of information, or maybe you made your own. It doesn't matter, if you got a marketed setting or your own setting. You need to look at it like not just going to players. Here's what I would say. Look at your lore, your setting, I don't care if it's marketed or your own, and go, if I needed investors in a business, how would I go about pitching investors to say, hey, isn't this something great? Don't you want to give me money towards this so we can do more with this? And treat it that way mentally. And then when you go to your players, they're the investors because they're going to invest their time, their energy into the game. So you want them to want to invest in the lore. And if you try to give them multiple pages, that's not going to sell. And that pitch would take too long. It would take days. You want a pitch where you could sit there and either give them the page or read it out to them. And in that 9 or 15 minutes or whatever amount of time it takes you to make that pitch happen, you're hoping to sell it. That's your aim. And again, you could put some just interesting information in there that might not be so vital, but might be very attractive. But you got to watch out. You don't want to put too much of that and then turn one page into 2 pages. Keep it to a half a page or a page pitch. That's how you get players to be interested in lore, and that's how you use lore to make the game interesting, right? The lore itself, I guess if you just want to sit down and read, fair enough, but most people don't just want to read it like some little story or novel, right? They're just not going to want to dig into it that way. So you really need to come up with a way of introducing the information. And what I said in this video, I think is the best way to go about it. That's what I do when I'm introducing new players to a world. I'll give them a pitch up front, related to the campaign and stuff related to their characters. And then as they go through the game, they learn more. All right, anyway, for now, take care. You know what you can do? You can hit the like button. You can share the video. Oh, and there's another button you can press. That one that lets you subscribe to my channel for more content. Oh yeah, there's that bell thing. You can press that so you know when I've uploaded a new video right away.